This next presentation is a food safety presentation from the plaintiff's attorney side, the attorney that would represent the agriculture company that is being charged with a violation of food safety. So Brad Sullivan, he actually has taught at Hartnell in the past. He's taught the Ag Laws and Regulations class. And he is a local attorney that has sat across from Marla Clark on numerous occasions. So the legal and regulatory proposals in food safety, a lot of growers feel like it's an overwhelming burden. This whole food safety process, certainly going back in time, was like this massive weight just crushing the industry. And I think largely that image has died down. Companies have learned to take food safety in stride. The Food Safety Modernization Act compliance issues, companies are kind of in a rhythm by now. It's been around long enough that companies are dealing with it, and they're dealing with it reasonably well. But especially for smaller companies, it's quite an expense. It's quite an issue to deal with. So Brad Sullivan has represented all aspects of the ag industry and foodborne contamination cases for 10 years. Now he's up to about almost 20. And he was co-lead defense counsel for that 2006 Dole baby spinach case or cases. And Paul Ravella is one of his colleagues, attorneys at the firm. So, you know, this is something that you certainly can't read quickly, but it details, and you could pause on this or you could get the PowerPoint and just look at this slide. It details the responsibility for tracking your product and tracing of food and record keeping. Now, this was at the time, so I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about these details because they've largely been revised and replaced by the Food Safety Modernization Act, which really didn't get finalized until about 2015, maybe. It was signed into law. It was written and signed into law, I think, in 2010. Then FSMA became law in 2011. And it took another 3 or 4 years to kind of revise, adapt, adjust, make it the FSMA that we know today. And this is pre-FSMA language on the screen. But you do need to be able to track your product, and you do need to be able to keep very strong records. That concept hasn't changed, and you need to know that. 2 huge things. I need trace back, meaning if I've got a bag of salad, I can trace it all the way back to the field in which it was grown, where it was manufactured, everything. You need to know everything about it. And you need to keep good, solid records. The details have changed on what records you need to keep, how effective your traceback system must be. But the concepts have remained the same. Now, for any given company, you need one up, one down tracing, meaning I need to be able to go backwards to whoever sold that to me and forwards to whoever I sold it to. So if I'm somewhere in the middle, I need to take care of all the tracing from A to B, or A to C if I'm B in the middle. I need to know that piece. I'm not responsible to be able to trace back all the way to the field myself. Again, what your level of tracing is depends on where you are in the process. If you're a manufacturer, you have a greater degree of responsibility for that traceback. You certainly need delivery information. Now, the form of that information is not dictated by law. You can keep it in a number of different ways, but it has to be easily accessible. You do not have to provide confidential information about how much fertilizer I used or what brand of fertilizer I used, how many days was it to harvest with my product, or any of that that could be considered proprietary information or confidential information, you don't have to provide it. And there have been court cases to determine what kinds of things can be considered confidential. Any information that you have for your food safety record keeping can become public records. So it's always a good idea to keep some information separated and possibly electronically duplicated as necessary. So your confidential information is here, your food safety information is here. So if there's a request for records, you don't have to try and pull it apart at the time of the request. You already have it separate, and you can just give them the information they're after. Because it could become not only information that goes into court, but into the public record. Claims to be not requiring new records, but your customers may impose this. So when we're looking at the rules for food safety regulations, they say, yeah, there's no new records to be kept. Well, that depends. There are no new records to be kept, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years. But just because you don't have to do new records for your government regulations, if you're selling to Walmart or you're selling to Taco Bell or something, they might decide they want certain records that you're going to keep. And they have the buying power. If you want to sell to them, they can ask for whatever they want. You provide it or we won't buy from you. We'll find somebody who will provide the information we're asking for. And that's been something that's been really challenging over, I would say, the last 10 years, is the moving target with the food safety requirements coming first from GAPS and HACCP programs, then from FSMA, and now we have something called Global GAP, or the Good Agricultural Practices at the global level, to be internationally compliant. And I think a lot of that is getting easier to deal with. I think companies are largely settling on something that is global GAP compliant to make it a little easier. So if you follow global GAP standards, you're at least pretty darn close to anything you might expect from either our own government or from your customers. Again, won't deal with this. Yeah, because this was very early in the FSMA process before it was totally finalized. So certain things might have changed. I'm not going to go into the language there. So what are the responses from an outbreak? Well, first you get lawsuits. People who get sick hire an attorney and they start suing. Or what about your customers? The customer is Safeway, Kroger's, Taco Bell, whoever you sold it to. The consumer is the one who ate it. The customer is the business to whom you sold it. New state and federal regulations might happen. Certainly FSMA is a response to outbreaks. And the more outbreaks you have, the more regulation you can see coming your way. So that's not what companies want. More regulation. Got enough. Legislative hearings or investigations. So at the state or federal level, the legislators say, hey, we're still having food safety problems. What are we going to do to squish our thumb down harder on the agriculture industry to stop this from happening and make our constituents, our voters, happy? New industry self-regulation. Certainly that is something that is strongly advocated. I've already mentioned that in a previous PowerPoint, that the industry does a good job of creating measurements or metrics to monitor itself, so they don't have these kinds of problems. Buyer retail defined regulations or super metrics. These are things that might come on top of what you already are doing for your own internal HACCP program or your global GAPS program, which overlap strongly, or your FSMA compliance, everything you're doing for all of these things. Now you got the super metrics, which is when your customer comes in and says, we want more. And when there's an outbreak, what happens? Walmart wants to be seen that they're doing something about it. So it hits the news that there's a problem, and Walmart says, we're doing something about it. And what's Walmart doing something about it? They're turning around to everybody who they buy from and saying, you better do something about it and give us good data, or we're not going to buy from you. Walmart doesn't do diddly squat about it. Walmart just forces all of their vendors to do the work. Does Walmart pay any more money for all that work? They don't pay a penny for it. I've seen it happen over and over again. These are the super metrics, what your buyers, your customers are demanding of you. Ongoing research, shifts in risk or loss. There's all kinds of things that happen, and it's evolved over the last decade or two. What happens in contracts? Who's liable? How do you protect yourself if you're just a trucker? How do you make sure that you keep records in such a way that you're not going to be held responsible? Well, you show that you picked up cool product, and you show that your truck was cool, and the sidewalls and the floor were cool, and it was monitored on the trip. You didn't break the cold chain in any way. That's something that can protect yourself. Also, making sure that your attorneys review your contract so you know what level of liability you have in your contract. Insurance limitations and increased customer requirements. Insurance companies do not want to spend any money. They just want to collect it. Whenever there's a problem, whenever there's an outbreak and they're paying out money because there's an insurance claim, they find ways to close the loophole. We're not paying that again. Just look at what's going on in California right now with all of these fires. Insurance companies left and right denying homeowners insurance for fire coverage, or increasing the cost outrageously. Somebody in my family, the cost of their homeowners insurance went up 500% in 1 year because of these fires. And they're not even in a super high risk fire zone. There are no big trees around at all. But they have a zip code where there are trees. And because their zip code, it has little forested areas, even though their house isn't in one, they got screwed. Well, that's true of food safety as well. It's really hard to cover yourself as an ag company for these food safety problems. So, but you do need insurance. So you need to work with your insurance broker. You need to ask lots of questions. You need to look at, spreading the risk. You can't get insurance to cover you for everything, but what can you afford? What is reasonable? What is going to protect you well enough that if there's a problem, you're not going out of business. You're going to be able to keep yourself covered. So not all coverage is the same. There certainly are common policy guidelines, umbrella policies. I have one for my house. So it's something that, somebody trips and falls at my house, somebody, I get in a car accident, whatever. I've got insurance for my home. I've got insurance for my car. Then I've got an umbrella policy. So if there's anything that ever happens that exceeds the individual policy of my home or my personal liability in an accident, the umbrella comes in and covers me. And the same kind of umbrella where your liability is limited by the policy. It will pay out and help protect you in a catastrophic event. What about recalls? What do you do in a case of a recall? Can you get an insurance for that to cover part of it to help you if you have to recall product due to an outbreak? What about insurance for crisis management? There's an outbreak. There's a food safety outbreak. All of a sudden, you're getting the phone ringing off the hook. People are sick. You're getting calls from the media. It's too late to think about what I'm going to do now. You've got to get your insurance planned now before there's an outbreak, not at the time of renewal for your policy. Get it over with. Fix your insurance. You want to make sure that you have all of your bases covered. I'm not going to read down this list, but if you're an ag company and you're looking at insurance, this is a good checklist of areas to be thinking about when it's time to make sure, am I properly covered now? And there's other crisis management things we'll talk about that you don't want to wait to the end. What about how companies, or how can companies avoid recalls, outbreaks, and or limit the scope of their losses? Well, you have to look at the state of the art food safety practices. Are you doing what is considered state of the art food safety management and testing and inspections? What about certificates of analysis? These are certificates showing that your water, your soil, your harvested products are safe. Product guarantees, warranties, discrete lots. These are all important things. Discrete lots is when you harvest things rather in some sort of a continuous process, or you manufacture goods like bagged salads or something. Rather than doing it in a continuous process, you're doing your inspections and your testing in discrete lots. So it limits your recall. So you can focus on saying it was this field, this time, even this hour where we had a problem. The stuff that came before or after, or from the field down the road, those were different. You don't mix things together. You keep things as separate as possible. The more separate you can keep it, it's a little harder on the maintenance of the data, keeping all of your record keeping straight, but it pays off if there ever is a problem. You'd much rather throw out 10 pallets of product rather than 150 pallets, because you can't tell when the problem started and stopped. So discrete lots. Passing liability to others, that's managing your contracts well. Sometimes you can limit your liability, put the responsibility on other shoulders. Sometimes you can't, depends. Where are you in this chain of the agricultural product? Hold harmless and indemnity agreements. These again are going with contract related issues. If there's a problem, will you hold harmless our company? We're just the trucker, for example, we're just the coolering operation, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that help you with your records to minimize losses or limiting the scope of the loss, containing the damage, as they say, in the case that there is an outbreak. What about a crisis management plan? This is the next step beyond just getting your insurance ready, but you need a crisis management plan before there's a problem. What do we need to do if there's a food safety problem? How should we do it? When should we do it? And who should do it? 4 major questions. And you need to have good answers to all of these questions, and you need to have them way before a food safety outbreak occurs, because you need to have that plan not only figured out, but well rehearsed. Do trial food safety outbreaks to test the system. Take a quick